Hi there, it's Brandy Oswald. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be diving deep into one of my favorite topics in the yoga world. We're going to be working today with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And recently I've thrown myself headfirst back into studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's the first time that I've revisited this text as a whole in a few years, and I'm still grappling with and dreaming on the first 3 sutras of Book 1. If you know anything about the Yoga Sutras, you know that what that means is I've gotten approximately 3 phrases into this traditional yogic text, and I'm swirling already with thoughts and ideas and doing lots of exploring and processing. And that's why I love this text so much. There's so many nuggets here that we can dive into, even in just the first 3 phrases of the text itself. There's so much depth to this text if we choose to look for it and to work with it on and off the mat. And so today I want to share with you a bit of background on the Yoga Sutras. I want to share with you what these first 3 sutras are that I've been working with, and the process of inquiry and self-exploration that they've ignited within me. So, let's get started. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are one of the oldest and most traditional texts behind the practice and philosophies of yoga. In fact, the Yoga Sutras were not, in their original form, a text at all, but an oral tradition dating back to approximately 1500 or 1000 BC. Each sutra is a short seed of information detailing topics that range from philosophy to asana practice to breath and meditation. And as an Ashtanga Yoga trained practitioner and instructor, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are the backbone of my practice and my yoga lineage. The Yoga Sutras outline the 8 limbs of yoga upon which Ashtanga Yoga is based. Ashtanga Yoga, if broken down, means Ashto, 8, and Anga, limb. So Ashtanga Yoga is the yoga of the 8-limbed path, which is outlined in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So needless to say, I work with this text a lot, and I revel in its nuances. So Book 1, Sutra 1 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali states, "Now the exposition of yoga is being made." Essentially it says, all right, I'm going to tell you about the theory of yoga. And Swami Satchidananda, the translator of the particular text that I enjoy working with, further elaborates on this sutra by explaining that mere philosophy will not satisfy us. We cannot reach the goal by mere words alone. Without practice, he says, nothing can be achieved. And I love that this is how a written book filled with written words begins. By saying, we cannot reach the goal of yoga with simply the words. But here's a book of words that will tell you how to go about doing it. I love that. It basically says, yeah, so just letting you know that you can read this book until you're blue in the face. But if you don't put any of this into practice, you're not going to get very far. What a hilarious, humbling, and perhaps daunting way to kick off one of the oldest and most traditional texts behind the practice of yoga. I like to interpret this very first sentence of the Yoga Sutras as, seriously, I mean it. We're not going to fuck around here. Right? How great. We have the words, we got to put them into practice. So then Sutra 2 of Book 1 is perhaps the most widely known sutra of all. Sutra 2 of Book 1 in Sanskrit reads, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And it's likely you've already heard this phrase somewhere. The translation of this sutra that I work with most is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, translated as yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. So I'll say that again. Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. Book 1, Sutra 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And as Swami Satchidananda, the translator of the text that I work with, points out in his translation, this sutra outlines both the definition and the practice of yoga. By definition, yoga is ceasing the fluctuations of the mind. It's getting the mind to stop its fluctuations. And to practice yoga, one must practice getting the mind to stop its fluctuations. How cool. So in this one phrase alone, yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. Patanjali defines what yoga is and tells us how we can go about practicing it. And the mind in yogic tradition is comprised of 3 parts. Ahamkara, which is the ego or the I-ness that we attach to our experiences. From there, there's the buddhi, the intellectual and discerning mind. And then the manas, the desiring mind. And these are the natural processes of the mind. It's natural for the mind to want to attach an I-ness, an identity, to our experiences. It's natural for the mind to be discerning, to practice intellect, and to discern from the experiences that are taking place. And it's also natural for the mind to desire, to want. And so these are the natural processes of the mind, but it's said that the chitta vrittis, or the mental fluctuations, disturb a peaceful state of mind. So the chitta vrittis, the mental fluctuations, disturb that peaceful state of balance that can exist between the self-identity, the discerning mind, and the desiring mind. And in his translation, Swami Satchidananda goes on to make some clarifying observations that completely rock my whole entire world. I love them. I'm pretty sure I don't like them, but I love them. And I want to explore them intensely. He says that the entire world is based on our thoughts and mental attitude. The entire world is your projection. He goes on to say that yoga doesn't bother much about changing the outside world. Because in fact, your attitude, your perception, is what determines your world. Shut the front door. I love it so much. The entire world is your projection, he says, which is why yoga doesn't bother much with changing the external world, the external environment. Rather, it focuses on changing the internal environment, the attitude, the perception with which you determine your world. And so I suppose I always really knew this to be true, but I was applying this notion on a much smaller scale. You see, I'd have a stressful situation at work and I'd think, how can I think about this differently so that it doesn't seem so negative or so stressful? I'd have a panic attack and I'd try to reason with my anxiety by attempting to understand that my racing thoughts were creating that anxious reality. So I was applying this notion in a much smaller scale, recognizing that my thoughts and my perception of particular situations could change how I was relating to them and what I actually saw and believed to be true within that situation. But I had never before considered that the entire freaking world, as I experience it, is based on my own perception of it. That blows my mind. And I mean, obviously it is, but I never stopped to think about it that way. Obviously, you and I are having 2 different parallel experiences of this world, each creating our own world in which we live, separated only by our differing perceptions of the outside world. How freaking wild is that? And Swami Satchidananda gives a very incredible, concise example of this notion by referencing a child and his father separated at birth. He talks about the father coming back to greet the son after years of separation, the son never having met his father. And it's upon this first meeting that the man who shows up in front of this boy is just a complete stranger. He's like any other person that this boy doesn't know, a stranger. Yet when his mother informs him that this man is indeed his father, the boy is overcome with emotion and embraces his father immediately. A stranger in one moment, a father in the very next, all determined by the boy's perception of the outside world, all determined by the boy's perception of that situation. His projection, his thoughts on the situation completely changed, transformed his reality. That is so wild to me. And thinking about that, perhaps the entire freaking world as we experience it is based on our own perception of it, which is why people with such differing opinions and views and experiences of the world exist in the same moment. Because we're basing it on our own individual perceptions and mental attitudes. And so what I take away most from this sutra, at least at this moment in my life, is to practice empathy, to do my best to understand that each one of us is having our own experience of the world. And I do not need to agree with your experience of the world, but I must understand that you are allowed to have your own experience of the world. That's that piece of empathy. While I don't have to agree with your perception of the world, I must understand that you are allowed to have that. And the struggle for me comes then when I perceive someone else's perception of the world and consequently their actions as unjust and immoral. Do I then attempt to impose my own perception of the outside world on them, or do I allow them to maintain their own perception without interfering? It's likely, however, that they are imposing their unjust and immoral perception of the world on others. Is it then that I step in and impose my perception of the world upon them, doing unto them what I don't agree with them doing unto others? And is it simply expressing our perception in hopes of educating those we disagree with, an imposition of our perception, or is that merely an educational experience? And perhaps what is the difference? And these are all questions that this theory brings up for me. What to do when I perceive someone else's perception of the world and consequently their actions as unjust and immoral? Do I have the right to attempt to impose my own perception of the outside world onto these other people whose perception and actions I have deemed unjust or immoral? And where does that right come, if it's there? When is it appropriate? Or is it ever? And is it this imposition of our perception or simply an educational experience when we share our perception? These are all the questions this theory brings up for me, and I don't expect to find answers, at least not yet. Perhaps not ever. I do, however, expect to explore them and discover some things I didn't realize before. I don't need to know the answers. What I need to do is remain empathetic and understanding, and be truthful to myself in how I am perceiving the outside world. And I think that's where I stand on this sutra for now. And so this brings us to Book 1, Sutra 3, the very next sutra, which elaborates on our nature and true existence, which I think helps elaborate on Sutra 2 a little bit. Sutra 3 reads, "Then the seer, or the self, abides in its own nature. Swami Satchidananda goes on to add that you are not the body nor the mind. You always see your mind and body acting in front of you. You know the mind creates thoughts. The seer, you know this. But you are not involved in this. And it's from this sutra, from this translation, that I hypothesize that we are not our thoughts, nor are we our bodies. These are the easily recognizable things that the mind tries to define us by because the rational mind craves tangible answers. However, the mind and the body are not our true essence. We are not them, and they are not us. The essence of who we are is so much more. It's something else entirely. Something separate from the mind and the body. And so here's the rudimentary and hilarious example of this that I like to use. So you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. Much like, perhaps, you have a cat, and yet somehow you are not your cat. And you also are not your body. You see, you live inside your body, but you are not your body. Much like, hopefully, you live inside your house, and yet somehow you are not your house. Comical, yes. Rudimentary, for sure. True, absolutely. You are not your cat. You have a cat. You are not your house in your house. And so you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts. You are not your body, yet you live inside it. And so if you are not your thoughts and you are not your body, then what the F are you? As the Yoga Sutras see it, you are the witness, the seer. The true you, who you are, witnesses your thoughts and your body, but is separate from them. It's said that to connect to this eternal you, the mind must be quiet. Otherwise, it distorts the truth. When exploring Sutra 2 and 3 side by side, I continue to arrive at the same realization. If the world in which I live is based entirely on my own thoughts and perception of it, and who I am is a witness to my thoughts and body, then perhaps I am able to choose my perception of the world. I am able to choose my own unique experience of the world in which I live. And if that is the case, how might I wish to move forward? What is the perception of the world that I would like to choose to explore? What is the reality within which I would like to choose to live? And I don't have any answers for you today. I'm still working on this exploration, feeling it all out. And note, I didn't say thinking all about it, thinking all around it. I said I'm feeling it all out. I'm working on feeling my way through this process to see what it means for me, for my life, for my desires, and how I choose to engage with others and the world around me. There's no one right answer because we're all having our own unique experiences of this moment and this world in which we live. That alone blows my mind and is simply the coolest thing ever, that we're all having our own unique experiences of this moment right now. And I will never have your experience of this moment. I can only ever have my own. And what's important to me might not matter at all to you. I somehow find that hilarious and humbling and terrifying and bizarre all at the same time. But perhaps the task isn't to find the answer, but to simply ask the question and move into our role as the witness. Perhaps we're simply meant to ask the questions. What is the perception of the world that I would like to choose to explore? What is the reality within which I would like to choose to live? And don't force an answer. Perhaps don't even search for an answer. Just ask the questions. Be the witness. And notice what comes up.